You wake up to the sound of your phone buzzing, another notification, another like, another comment. But when you put it down, the room feels heavier, the silence is louder. You scroll through endless feeds, surrounded by digital connections, yet you've never felt more alone. This isn't just your story, it's the quiet epidemic of our time. But what if loneliness isn't a flaw to fix, but a space to grow? 2,000 years ago, a philosophy was born in the chaos of ancient markets and battlefields, teaching people how to turn isolation into strength. Stoicism, today, it's not just for marble statues or dusty books. It's a toolkit for the modern soul. In this video, we're diving into 25 Stoic ways to transform loneliness from a burden into your greatest teacher. These aren't vague ideas. They're battle-tested strategies, from the journals of emperors to the letters of slaves, now reshaped for your life. By the end, you'll see solitude differently, not as emptiness, but as the blank page where your best self is written. Let's begin. Now let's step into the first Stoic practice, one that might surprise you. The Stoics didn't see loneliness as a problem to solve, but as a natural part of being human. Think of it like weather. Sometimes it's sunny, sometimes it rains, but neither is good or bad in itself. Loneliness is just another condition, like hunger or tiredness, that comes and goes. The key is amor fati, a Latin phrase meaning love of fate. It's about embracing whatever life throws at you, even solitude, not resisting it. Imagine holding a clenched fist tight around sand. The harder you grip, the more slips through. But open your hand and the sand rests there peacefully. That's what acceptance does. When you stop fighting loneliness, you take away its power to hurt you. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus, born a slave, knew suffering firsthand. He taught that pain comes not from the event itself, but from our judgment of it. Label loneliness as bad and it becomes a wound. See it as neutral and it's just space to think, create, or rest. Ancient Stoics believed everything in nature has a purpose, even isolation. Wolves howl alone to find their pack, seeds split in darkness to grow. Your loneliness isn't a sign something's wrong. It might be the soil for something new. So next time solitude feels heavy, try this. Say aloud, this is what's happening right now. No stories, no drama, just fact. That simple shift, that's amor fati in action. And here's the secret: when you stop treating loneliness like an enemy, it starts feeling more like a quiet companion, one that, believe it or not, might have something to teach you. Now let's shift our focus to something powerful, the Stoic art of control. Epictetus, one of the great Stoic teachers, had a simple but life-changing idea. Some things are up to us and some things are not. Picture this: you're sitting alone at home and the silence feels heavy. That loneliness, it's not up to you, but how you respond to it, that's entirely yours to shape. This is the dichotomy of control, the Stoic practice of separating what you can change from what you can't. Think of it like being stuck in traffic. You can't magically clear the road, but you can choose whether to rage at the delay or use the time to listen to a podcast, call a friend, or just breathe. Solitude works the same way. You might not control whether you're alone right now, but you control what you do with that time. Read a book, write down your thoughts. Take a walk and really notice the world around you. The Stoics called this turning obstacles into fuel. Here's a practical way to apply it. Next time loneliness creeps in, ask yourself, what part of this can I actually influence? Maybe you can't force someone to call you, but you can reach out to a friend or family member. Maybe you can't change your living situation today, but you can plan one small activity that brings you joy, even if it's just making your favorite meal. The goal isn't to ignore the feeling, but to redirect your energy toward what's truly in your hands. Epictetus put it bluntly: we suffer not from the events in our lives, but from our judgments about them. That's the key. Loneliness isn't the problem, it's the story we tell ourselves about it. What if instead of thinking, I'm alone because no one cares, you tried, I'm alone, and that means I have space to grow? That shift doesn't erase the feeling, but it gives you power over it. So here's your challenge. For the next week, when solitude shows up, don't just endure it, use it. Choose one thing within your control and act on it. The Stoics believed that even in isolation, we're never powerless because the most important thing you control. Your mind, and that's where real freedom begins. Now let's explore a Stoic tool that might sound counterintuitive at first: negative visualization. This isn't about dwelling on the worst-case scenario to make yourself miserable. It's about perspective. Seneca, the Stoic philosopher, called this premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. The idea is simple. By imagining things could be worse, we often realize our current situation isn't as unbearable as it feels. Picture this: you're feeling lonely, maybe even a bit sorry for yourself. Now take that feeling and amplify it. Imagine you are completely isolated, no texts, no calls, no chance of seeing another person for months. Suddenly, that quiet evening alone doesn't seem so harsh, does it? That's the power of negative visualization. It doesn't dismiss your loneliness, but it helps you see it in a new light. Seneca wrote letters to his friend Lucilius about this very practice. He reminded him that even in exile or illness, there's always something to be grateful for. If you have a roof over your head, food to eat, or even the ability to step outside and feel the sun on your face, you're already ahead of the worst-case scenario. The goal isn't to shame yourself for feeling lonely, but to anchor yourself in reality. Here's how to try it. Next time loneliness weighs on you, pause and ask, what if it were worse? Maybe you're alone tonight, but you still have people who care about you, just not right this second. Maybe you miss someone, but you still have memories of them. This exercise isn't about denying your emotions, it's about balancing them with gratitude. Seneca put it best: he who has learned to die has unlearned slavery. In other words, when we confront our fears, even the fear of being alone, we take away their power over us. So give it a shot. Let negative visualization shrink loneliness down to size, because sometimes the best way to appreciate what you have is to imagine life without it. Now let's shift our focus inward, because sometimes the most meaningful conversations happen when you're the only one in the room. This brings us to the fourth Stoic practice: cultivating inner dialogue. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor, was a master of this. His personal journals, later published as meditations, weren't written for an audience. They were letters to himself, a way to clarify his thoughts, confront his fears, and build a friendship with his own mind. Think of loneliness as an invitation, not a sentence. When you're alone, you have uninterrupted time to ask yourself the questions that matter. Marcus didn't avoid his solitude, he used it. He'd write things like, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this and you will find strength. That's the essence of inner dialogue. It's not about filling the silence with noise. It's about turning solitude into a space where you can hear yourself think. Here's how to start. Grab a notebook or even your phone's notes app and try these Stoic-inspired prompts. First, what's one thing I'm avoiding thinking about and why? Often, loneliness masks deeper emotions we're sidestepping. Second, if my best friend felt this way, what would I tell them? We're usually kinder to others than to ourselves. Third, what can this moment teach me? Loneliness can be a classroom if you let it. Marcus Aurelius didn't journal to wallow. He wrote to untangle his mind, to separate what he controlled from what he didn't. Your inner dialogue can do the same. When loneliness feels heavy, ask yourself, is this pain coming from the situation or from my judgment of it? That's Stoicism in action, examining the stories we tell ourselves. So tonight, before you reach for the distraction of a screen or another scroll through social media, pause. Borrow a page from Marcus's playbook. Write down one honest thought, one hard question, or one small victory. Over time, you'll find that the person you're alone with isn't so bad after all. In fact, they might just become your greatest ally. And speaking of allies, the Stoics believed in another powerful antidote to loneliness, one that shifts your focus from inward to outward. But we'll explore that next. Now let's turn our attention outward, because one of the most powerful ways to dissolve loneliness is to step outside yourself. The fifth Stoic practice is serving others. The Stoics didn't just preach self-mastery. They believed in being useful, in weaving yourself into the fabric of the world around you. Seneca put it bluntly, no one can live happily who has regard to himself alone. Loneliness often tricks us into thinking we're isolated islands, but Stoicism reminds us we're part of a larger whole, what Marcus Aurelius called the cosmic city. When you shift your focus from "why am I alone" to "who can I help today," something profound happens. The weight of solitude lightens. You're no longer just thinking about your own emptiness. You're filling someone else's cup, and in the process, you rediscover your own purpose. This doesn't require grand gestures. Start small. Hold the door for a stranger. Volunteer at a local food bank. Send a thoughtful text to a friend who's struggling. Even tending to a plant or feeding birds in the park counts. The key is intentionality. Stoicism teaches that every action, no matter how small, can be virtuous if done with awareness. Here's the paradox: when you pour energy into others, you often receive more than you give. The elderly person you visit at the nursing home, their gratitude becomes your connection. The neighbor you help carry groceries, their smile becomes your reminder that you belong. The Stoics knew this secret. Service isn't self-sacrifice, it's self-renewal. So next time loneliness creeps in, ask yourself, where can I be of use today? Not only will you ease someone else's burden, but you'll also remind yourself that you're never truly alone. And if you're wondering how to take this further, the Stoics had another surprising tool, one that involves stripping away distractions rather than adding more. But that's a conversation for next time. Now let's take a step back, because sometimes the cure for loneliness isn't adding more to your life but stripping things away. The sixth Stoic practice is embracing minimalism. In a world that's constantly buzzing with notifications, endless scrolling, and the pressure to always be connected, loneliness can feel even more crushing. But the Stoics, like Musonius Rufus, taught that simplicity is the key to finding peace in solitude. He famously said, "The person who has many possessions is not richer but poorer." And that applies to more than just material things. Think about it. When you're surrounded by noise, endless social media feeds, background TV, the urge to always be doing something, solitude feels like emptiness. But when you intentionally reduce the clutter, both physical and mental, something shifts. Loneliness starts to feel like quiet, like space to breathe. The Stoics didn't avoid being alone, they mastered it by removing distractions so they could truly hear their own thoughts. This isn't about living in a bare room or giving up every comfort. It's about asking what's essential. Maybe it's turning off your phone for an hour to read or journal. Maybe it's clearing a corner of your home where you can sit without screens. Musonius Rufus believed that the fewer things we depend on, the freer we become, and that includes the constant need for external validation. When you stop filling every moment with noise, you start noticing the richness of your own company. Here's the irony: the more we chase connection through endless scrolling or mindless consumption, the lonelier we often feel. But when we embrace minimalism, solitude transforms from something to escape into something to appreciate. The Stoics knew this. They didn't fear being alone, they feared being distracted from themselves. So if loneliness feels heavy lately, try this. Sit quietly for just 5 minutes. No phone, no background noise, let the stillness settle. You might just find that what felt like loneliness was really just the absence of clutter. And if you're ready to go deeper, the Stoics had another lesson, one about how solitude can become your greatest teacher. But that's a story for next time. Now let's shift our perspective, because loneliness isn't just something to endure, but something that can actually teach us. The seventh Stoic practice is finding lessons in solitude. Seneca, one of the great Stoic philosophers, wrote extensively about how being alone isn't empty time, it's fertile ground for growth. In his letters, he described solitude as a mirror, reflecting back the parts of ourselves we often ignore in the noise of daily life. He believed that when we step away from the crowd, we finally hear the voice we've been drowning out, the one that asks deeper questions, sparks new ideas, and pushes us to understand who we really are. Think about Isaac Newton. During a period of isolation when the plague forced him away from university, he didn't just pass the time, he revolutionized science. Those quiet months led to his groundbreaking work on calculus, optics, and gravity. Solitude didn't break him, it unleashed him, and that's the Stoic view. Loneliness isn't a void. It's a classroom. Seneca went even further. He argued that solitude is where we confront our fears, clarify our values, and discover untapped strength. In one of his letters, he wrote, "You must withdraw into yourself as much as possible. Associate with people who can improve you. Welcome those you can improve." The process is mutual, for people learn while they teach. But here's the key. He wasn't just talking about physical solitude. He meant mental solitude too. The kind where you silence the chatter of others' expectations and listen to your own inner wisdom. So if you're feeling lonely, ask yourself, what could this time teach me? Maybe it's a chance to finally write that book, learn a skill, or simply sit with your thoughts until they reveal something new. The Stoics didn't see solitude as punishment. They saw it as preparation, a space where you strip away distractions and meet yourself not as the world defines you, but as you truly are, and that's where the real growth begins. But growth isn't just about looking inward. Sometimes it's about turning outward in a way that gives loneliness meaning. And that brings us to the next practice, one that transforms isolation into connection in the most Stoic way possible. Now let's talk about turning loneliness into strength, because the eighth Stoic practice is all about building mental resilience. The Stoics had a powerful phrase for this: the obstacle is the way. What does that mean? It's the idea that challenges aren't roadblocks, they're the path itself. And loneliness, it's one of those obstacles that can actually forge emotional endurance if we let it. Take Cato the Younger, one of Stoicism's most disciplined figures. He didn't just preach resilience, he lived it. Whether facing political exile or personal loss, he treated hardship as training. His philosophy was simple: discomfort isn't your enemy, it's your coach. When you're alone, that's when you have the space to practice patience, to sit with discomfort until it stops feeling like a threat and starts feeling like a tool. Think of loneliness like lifting weights for your mind. Every moment you spend sitting with it without rushing to distract yourself or numb the feeling, you're building emotional muscle. The Stoics called this ascesis, disciplined practice. It's not about pretending loneliness doesn't hurt. It's about recognizing that the hurt itself can make you stronger. Just like sore muscles after a workout mean growth is happening. Cato's life showed this in action. He'd deliberately wear thin clothing in winter or walk barefoot on rough roads, not because he enjoyed suffering, but because he knew comfort could make us soft. Loneliness works the same way. When we stop fearing it, we start seeing its value. It teaches us to rely on ourselves, to find stability even when no one else is around. So next time loneliness feels heavy, remember, this isn't just emptiness, it's an invitation to train, to prove to yourself that you can endure, adapt, and even thrive in the quiet. Because resilience isn't something you're born with, it's something you build one solitary moment at a time. And speaking of building, the next Stoic practice takes this idea even further, showing how solitude can become a surprising source of connection when we shift our focus outward. Now let's tackle a modern trap that amplifies loneliness. The ninth Stoic practice is about limiting social comparisons. Here's the hard truth: envy is loneliness in disguise. When we constantly measure our lives against others, especially the curated highlights we see online, we're setting ourselves up for isolation. The Stoics saw this coming 2,000 years ago. They warned that comparing your behind the scenes to someone else's highlight reel is a recipe for misery. Take social media, for example. It promises connection but often delivers the opposite. Scrolling through endless photos of gatherings, achievements, or seemingly perfect relationships can make solitude feel like failure, but Stoicism flips this script. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts." In other words, loneliness isn't just about being alone, it's about the stories we tell ourselves when we're alone. The Stoic antidote: contentment with your own path. Epictetus put it bluntly, don't seek for everything to happen as you wish, but wish for everything to happen as it does. That means focusing on your journey, not someone else's. When you catch yourself envying another person's friendships or milestones, pause. Ask yourself, is this comparison serving me? Or is it just stealing my peace? History's Stoics faced this too. Seneca, who advised Nero, saw Rome's elite drown in jealousy and status-seeking. His solution: true happiness is to enjoy the present without anxious dependence on the future. In modern terms, log off, breathe. Remind yourself that social media is a stage, not reality. The connections that matter, the deep, quiet ones, don't always make for flashy posts. So next time loneliness creeps in because you feel less than, remember, your path is yours alone. The Stoics didn't waste energy wishing they were someone else. They invested it in becoming who they were meant to be, and that's how you turn loneliness into something far more powerful: self-possession. And speaking of self-possession, the next Stoic practice takes this inward focus even deeper, showing how a simple morning ritual can anchor you before the world pulls you in a dozen directions. Now let's shift gears to something practical. The 10th Stoic practice is all about creating a morning routine. Think of it as setting the tone for your day before the world has a chance to throw its chaos at you. The Stoics knew that how you start your morning shapes how you navigate everything that follows. Marcus Aurelius didn't wake up scrolling through messages or rushing into distractions. He began his days with reflection, writing in his journal, "When you arise in the morning, think of what a precious privilege it is to be alive, to breathe, to think, to enjoy, to love." That's the Stoic mindset, grounding yourself in gratitude before anything else. Here's how you can build a Stoic morning ritual. First, carve out just 5 to 10 minutes of quiet. Sit with your thoughts, no phone, no noise. Ask yourself 2 questions. What's one thing I can do today to grow? And what's one thing I'm grateful for right now? This isn't about grand goals, it's about intention. Even small, deliberate actions, like savoring your coffee mindfully or taking a few deep breaths, can anchor you. Next, set a micro goal. The Stoics weren't fans of over-planning, but they valued focus. Maybe it's finishing a task you've avoided or having a meaningful conversation. Epictetus said, "First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do." Your morning routine is where that conversation starts, and here's the key: reduce reliance on external validation. Social media, likes, texts, or even morning news can hijack your mindset before you've had a chance to center yourself. Seneca warned, "Until we have begun to go without them, we fail to realize how unnecessary many things are." Try delaying digital input for the first hour. Instead, let your morning be about what you need, not what the world demands. History's Stoics used solitude to their advantage. Imagine Seneca lighting a lamp at dawn to write, or Musonius Rufus starting his day with physical labor to strengthen discipline. Your version might look different: a walk, journaling, or silent meditation, but the principle is the same. Own your mornings and you'll own your day. And speaking of ownership, the next Stoic practice takes this inward focus further, showing how daily immersion in philosophy can turn loneliness into a classroom for wisdom. Now let's turn to something timeless. The 11th Stoic practice is about making philosophy a daily habit. The Stoics didn't just read wisdom, they lived it, and that's how loneliness transforms from a burden into a teacher. Think of ancient texts like Marcus Aurelius' Meditations as letters from a friend who's walked this path before. He wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this and you will find strength. That's the gift of daily study, realizing your struggles aren't unique and generations before you have left a roadmap. Start small, just 5 minutes a day with a Stoic passage. Read slowly, not to finish but to absorb. Ask yourself, how does this apply to my life right now? Epictetus' discourses or Seneca's letters work like mirrors, reflecting back truths you might avoid in the noise of daily life. Here's why this works. Philosophy doesn't promise to erase loneliness, it redefines it. When you read Seneca's advice on solitude, you see it as space for growth, not emptiness. His words remind us no one is alone who finds companionship in thought. That's the shift, turning isolation into a dialogue with history's greatest minds. And don't just read, engage, keep a notebook to jot down lines that resonate. Imagine debating a Stoic thinker. Would Marcus Aurelius pity you or challenge you to act? This turns passive reading into active conversation, filling the quiet with purpose. The beauty of daily study is how it normalizes struggle. When you see that even emperors like Marcus wrestled with doubt, your loneliness feels less like a flaw and more like part of being human. As he wrote, the universe is change, life is understanding. Every page turns isolation into insight. Now, let's take this deeper. The next practice connects these philosophical lessons to something even more profound. How reflecting on life's brevity can reshape your relationship with loneliness. Let's explore something that might seem counterintuitive at first. The 12th Stoic practice, memento mori, or remembering that we will die. At first glance, reflecting on mortality might sound grim, but the Stoics saw it as a powerful tool to strip away life's distractions and focus on what truly matters. Think about it this way. When you're lonely, it's easy to fixate on the absence of people around you, the parties you weren't invited to, the texts left unanswered. But memento mori shifts that perspective. It asks, if today were your last day, would those superficial connections even matter? Suddenly, the quiet in your life isn't emptiness, it's space to nurture the relationships that truly fulfill you. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think." That's the heart of this practice. When you remember time is limited, you stop chasing shallow validation and start investing in conversations that deepen your understanding of yourself and others. A single meaningful talk with a friend becomes more valuable than 100 likes on a post. Here's how to apply it. Each morning, take a moment to acknowledge life's impermanence, not to dwell on fear, but to clarify your priorities. Ask yourself, who would I reach out to if I had only a week left? Then act on it. Send that letter, make that call. Loneliness often comes from feeling disconnected, but memento mori reminds us that genuine connection is always within reach if we're brave enough to seek it. And this isn't just theory. Seneca wrote letters to his friends with the urgency of someone who knew time was precious. His words weren't small talk, they were deep, honest, and alive with purpose. That's the gift of this practice. It turns loneliness from a void into a catalyst for richer relationships. So the next time solitude feels heavy, ask yourself, what would I regret not saying or doing? Then go do it, because the Stoics knew something profound. Remembering death isn't about despair. It's about waking up to the life you're already living. Now, let's move to the next practice, where we'll see how this clarity leads to another Stoic strength, building self-sufficiency from within. Now, let's turn our attention to a Stoic concept that flips the script on loneliness entirely, the idea of self-sufficiency, or what the Stoics called autarky. This isn't about isolating yourself or pushing people away. It's about cultivating an inner strength so solid that your sense of worth isn't tied to who's around you. Epictetus, the former slave who became one of Stoicism's greatest teachers, had a brilliant metaphor for this. He said life is like a banquet. Imagine you're at a grand feast. The Stoic approach isn't to fret over who's sitting next to you or whether you're at the right table. Instead, you focus on what you bring to the meal, your manners, your gratitude, your ability to savor the moment. That's the essence of autarky. When you stop depending on others to fill your plate, you realize you're already holding everything you need. Here's why this matters for loneliness. So often we feel empty because we're waiting for someone to call, to include us, to validate us. But autarky asks, what if you could validate yourself? Think of Marcus Aurelius, who ruled an empire yet found solace in his own journal. Or Seneca, who wrote, "No one is laughable who can be content with themselves." That's the power of inner independence. It doesn't mean you don't cherish relationships. It means you don't crumble without them. Practical tip: start small. Next time you're alone, resist the urge to distract yourself with scrolling or reaching out just to fill silence. Sit with yourself. Write down 3 things you appreciate about your own company. Over time, you'll build what the Stoics called an inner citadel, a mental fortress where loneliness can't siege your peace. This isn't about rejecting connection. It's about entering relationships from a place of wholeness, not lack. Because when you're no longer desperate for others to complete you, every interaction becomes a choice, not a need. And that's when loneliness loses its grip. Up next, we'll explore how Stoicism teaches us to reframe one of loneliness's sharpest pains, rejection, and turn it into fuel for growth. Now, let's shift our perspective on one of the toughest emotions tied to loneliness: rejection. Stoicism teaches us to see rejection not as a door slamming shut, but as a signpost pointing us towards something better. Think of it as life's way of redirecting you, not punishing you. Take the story of Musonius Rufus, the Stoic philosopher banished from Rome not once but twice. Instead of crumbling, he used his exile to teach philosophy to anyone who would listen, even in remote villages. His students later said those years in exile were where his deepest wisdom took root. Or consider Cicero, who, though not a Stoic himself, leaned on their teachings when political rejection forced him out of public life. He called it a chance to cultivate the mind like a fertile field. Here's the Stoic reframe: rejection isn't about your worth, it's about fit. Epictetus put it bluntly: if someone tells you they don't want you around, why would you stay where you're not valued? That's not coldness, it's clarity. Every no frees you to find a yes that aligns with your purpose. Try this exercise. Next time you face rejection, whether it's a missed job, a faded friendship, or a silent phone, ask, what might this make space for? Write down 3 possibilities. Maybe it's time to hone a skill, meet new people, or simply grow thicker skin. The Stoics didn't just endure rejection, they mined it for lessons. And remember, even Marcus Aurelius, the emperor, faced betrayal and criticism. His response: the obstacle becomes the way. When rejection stings, don't let it define you. Let it refine you, because sometimes the universe isn't saying you're not enough. It's saying this isn't enough for you. Coming up, we'll explore how loneliness can become your secret weapon for creativity, just as it did for history's greatest thinkers and artists. Now, let's turn loneliness into something unexpected, a powerhouse for productivity. Think of solitude not as empty time, but as a blank canvas waiting for your masterpiece. The Stoics knew this well. Seneca, even in his busiest years, carved out hours of deep work, writing letters and essays that still guide us today. He didn't just fill the silence. He used it to build a legacy. Here's the shift: when you're alone, you're free from distractions. No interruptions, no small talk, just you and the work that matters. Modern research calls this deep work, but the Stoics were ahead of the curve. Marcus Aurelius wrote his meditations not in a bustling palace, but in the quiet of military camps. His solitude became his studio. So how do you start? Pick one skill or project you've been putting off. Maybe it's learning an instrument, writing, or coding. Then create a ritual, light a candle, set a timer, or play ambient sounds, whatever signals to your brain it's time to focus. Seneca would say, don't scatter your energy. Pour it all into one thing until it shines, and here's the Stoic twist. When loneliness creeps in, don't resist it. Invite it in as your collaborator. The painter Frida Kahlo, bedridden for months, turned her isolation into haunting self-portraits. The composer Beethoven, losing his hearing, wrote symphonies in his head. Loneliness didn't break them, it focused them. Try this challenge. For the next week, dedicate 30 minutes of your solitude to deep work. No multitasking, no scrolling, just you and the task. Notice how the ache of loneliness fades when you're in flow, because solitude, when used right, isn't a void, it's a forge, and you're the blacksmith. Next, we'll step outside literally to explore how nature, as the Stoics believed, can be the most grounding companion of all. Now, let's step beyond the walls of your solitude and into the open arms of nature. The Stoics didn't just tolerate the natural world, they revered it. Marcus Aurelius called it the cosmic city, a reminder that we're never truly alone when we're part of something so vast. Picture this, you're walking through a forest, and with every step, the weight of loneliness lifts a little. The rustling leaves, the steady rhythm of your breath, the sky stretching endlessly above you, it's all whispering the same Stoic truth. You belong here. This isn't just poetic thinking. Science backs it up. Studies show that time in nature lowers stress and sharpens focus, something the Stoics understood centuries ago. When Seneca felt overwhelmed, he escaped to the countryside. He didn't just stroll, he observed. The way a river carves its path taught him resilience. The seasons changing mirrored life's impermanence. Nature wasn't a backdrop, it was his mentor. So how can you make nature your companion? Start small. A 5-minute walk without your phone. Sit on a park bench and watch clouds drift. Notice how the air feels, how sunlight filters through branches. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Look deep into nature, and then you will understand everything better." He wasn't exaggerating. When loneliness feels heavy, nature offers perspective. You're not isolated, you're interconnected. Here's a challenge. Next time solitude weighs on you, go outside. Stand still for 3 minutes and name 3 things you see, 2 you hear, 1 you smell. It's a Stoic mindfulness hack. By anchoring yourself in the present, you dissolve the illusion of separation. Because nature doesn't judge or abandon. It simply is, and so are you, part of its grand design. Up next, we'll tackle a habit that magnifies loneliness, complaining, and how Stoics turn grievances into quiet strength. Now, let's shift our focus to something we've all done but rarely admit: complaining. It's easy to fall into the trap of venting about loneliness, as if repeating our struggles will somehow lessen them. But here's the Stoic truth: complaining doesn't heal isolation. It deepens it. Every time we voice our grievances without action, we reinforce a victim mentality, convincing ourselves that we're powerless against loneliness. The Stoics called this the discipline of assent, the practice of pausing before we react, choosing silence over self-pity. Think of it like this: when you stub your toe, the immediate reaction might be to shout or curse. But what does that actually solve? The pain is still there. Complaining about loneliness works the same way. It's a reflex, not a remedy. Epictetus put it bluntly: don't explain your philosophy. Embody it. Instead of narrating your solitude, ask yourself, what can I do about it? The moment you shift from lamenting to problem solving, you reclaim agency. History offers a striking example. When the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius faced betrayal and war, he didn't fill his journals with rants. He wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this and you will find strength. That's the Stoic alternative to complaining: silent reflection followed by deliberate action. Maybe you're lonely because you've withdrawn from social events. Instead of saying, "No one invites me anymore," try reaching out first. Or if solitude feels overwhelming, design a routine that fills your time with purpose: reading, creating, learning. Here's a challenge. For one day, catch yourself every time you're about to complain out loud or in your head, and replace it with a single question: what's the next step? This tiny pivot trains your brain to see obstacles as puzzles to solve. not injustices to endure, because loneliness thrives in echo chambers of complaint. Silence it with action, and you'll hear something far more powerful: your own resilience. Coming up, we'll explore a practice the Stoics used to harden their resolve, voluntary discomfort, and how leaning into it can transform loneliness from a burden into a tool. Now, let's talk about a Stoic practice that might sound counterintuitive at first: voluntary discomfort. The idea is simple but powerful. By willingly stepping into situations that challenge us, we train ourselves to handle life's inevitable hardships with grace. Think of it like building a muscle. You wouldn't expect to lift heavy weights without first putting in the work, right? The same goes for emotional resilience. The Stoics called this hardening, and they practiced it in small, deliberate ways. Marcus Aurelius would sleep on a thin mat instead of a plush bed. Seneca would wear rough clothing or skip meals to remind himself that comfort isn't a necessity. Even something as simple as taking a cold shower, a modern twist on this ancient idea, can teach you to endure discomfort without complaint. So how does this apply to loneliness? When we're alone, our minds often race to fill the silence with distractions: endless scrolling, binge watching, anything to avoid sitting with our thoughts. But what if, instead of running from solitude, you leaned into it? Try a digital detox for a day. Leave your phone in another room, sit with the quiet. At first, it might feel unsettling, even painful, but here's the Stoic secret: discomfort is where growth happens. By choosing to face solitude head-on, you strip loneliness of its power. You prove to yourself that you can survive and even thrive without constant external stimulation. Over time, what once felt like isolation becomes a space for clarity and strength. The Stoics knew this well. The more you practice discomfort, the less life's hardships can shake you. Up next, we'll look at how studying the lives of Stoic role models can offer companionship across time, turning solitude into a dialogue with history's greatest minds. Now, let's shift our focus to another powerful Stoic tool: finding role models who mastered the art of solitude. History is filled with Stoic thinkers who not only endured loneliness but transformed it into a source of strength. Take Seneca, for example. Exiled to Corsica, he turned isolation into an opportunity for deep reflection, writing letters that still guide us today. Or consider Zeno, who lost everything in a shipwreck but rebuilt his life by founding Stoicism itself. Their stories aren't just lessons, they're companionship across centuries. When you study these figures, you're not just reading about their lives, you're engaging in a conversation with them. Marcus Aurelius wrote his private journal, now known as Meditations, never intending it for publication. Yet his words feel like a personal mentor whispering advice. Imagine sitting down with Epictetus, a former slave who taught that true freedom comes from within, no matter your circumstances. These thinkers faced loneliness head-on and left behind a roadmap for us to follow. Here's how to put this into practice. Pick one Stoic figure, maybe Seneca for his resilience or Musonius Rufus for his calm in exile, and dive into their writings. Notice how they reframed solitude as a gift, not a burden. Their struggles mirror ours, but their responses reveal what's possible. You'll start to see loneliness differently, not as emptiness but as space to grow, just as they did. And here's the beautiful paradox: by connecting with these long-gone mentors, you'll feel less alone. Their wisdom bridges time, offering the kind of companionship that doesn't depend on physical presence. Up next, we'll explore how gratitude journaling, inspired by Marcus Aurelius, can turn even the quietest moments into sources of joy. Now, let's turn our attention to a simple yet profound Stoic practice: keeping a gratitude journal, just as Marcus Aurelius did. In his personal writings, he often listed the things he was thankful for, from the kindness of others to the beauty of nature. This wasn't just a feel-good exercise. It was a deliberate way to shift his focus from what he lacked to what he already had. And here's the thing: when you feel lonely, your mind tends to magnify the absence of connection. But gratitude journaling flips that script. It trains you to spot the small, everyday blessings you might otherwise overlook. Think of it like this: loneliness often narrows your vision, making you hyper-aware of what's missing. But when you write down even the tiniest joys, a warm cup of tea, a stranger's smile, the way sunlight filters through your window, you're rewiring your brain to notice abundance. Marcus Aurelius called this taking stock of your riches, and he was onto something. By documenting these moments, you're not denying your loneliness. You're balancing it with evidence that good things still exist around you, even in solitude. Here's how to start. Each night, jot down 3 things you're grateful for. They don't need to be grand. Maybe it's a book that moved you, a meal you enjoyed, or simply the comfort of your bed. The key is consistency. Over time, this practice builds a mental reservoir of positivity you can draw from when loneliness feels heavy. And here's the Stoic twist: it also prepares you for harder days. Just as Seneca advised reflecting on adversity in advance, gratitude journaling helps you stockpile reminders of joy, so you're never wholly at the mercy of fleeting emotions. What makes this especially powerful is its accessibility. You don't need anyone else to participate. It's a conversation with yourself, guided by the wisdom of a Roman emperor who found solace in the same habit. And as you fill those pages, you might just discover what Marcus did. That loneliness loses its sting when you realize how much life, even in quiet moments, still has to offer. Next, we'll explore how detaching from social expectations, another Stoic principle, can free you from the pressure to always be connected. Now, let's shift gears to a Stoic principle that might feel counterintuitive at first: detaching from outcomes. Here's the hard truth: loneliness often gets worse when we tie our happiness to external validation, like how many messages we receive or how often we're included. The Stoics called this indifference, but don't mistake it for apathy. It's about recognizing that while you can control your actions, reaching out, showing up, being present, you can't control how others respond. And that's where freedom begins. Think of it like planting a seed. You water it, give it sunlight, and do everything right, but you can't force it to grow. The Stoics would say your job ends with the effort, the rest, that's not yours to command. When you obsess over outcomes like why someone didn't text back or why you weren't invited, you're handing your peace over to forces outside your control. Epictetus put it bluntly: some things are up to us and some are not. Your effort to connect, up to you; the reaction, not so much. This doesn't mean you stop trying. It means you stop suffering over what you can't dictate. Imagine 2 versions of yourself: one who agonizes over every unanswered call, and one who focuses on the quality of their outreach, kind, genuine, without expectation. Which one feels lighter? That's the Stoic shift. Craving constant connection is like clutching water. The tighter you grip, the more it slips away. But when you focus on the integrity of your actions, loneliness loses its power to define you. Here's how to practice this. Next time you send a message or make plans, pause afterward. Acknowledge that you've done your part, then release the need for a specific outcome. If the response isn't what you hoped, return to what you can control, your perspective. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." That's the anchor. Detaching isn't giving up, it's choosing where to invest your energy. And often, that's the very shift that makes genuine connection possible, because you're no longer coming from a place of lack but from wholeness. Up next, we'll explore how loneliness, when channeled the right way, can become fuel for creativity, another Stoic superpower. Now, let's turn loneliness into something unexpected, your creative fuel. Think of solitude not as emptiness but as a blank canvas. History's greatest artists and writers didn't just endure isolation, they harnessed it. Take the Stoic poet Rainer Maria Rilke, who wrote his most profound letters on solitude, calling it the necessary void where art is born. Or consider Marcus Aurelius himself, who penned his private meditations not in a bustling palace, but in the quiet corners of war camps. Loneliness for them wasn't a barrier, it was the raw material for mastery. Here's the Stoic twist. Isolation is a test, not a punishment. When life hands you solitude, the question isn't why me, but what can I build with this? Seneca put it perfectly. Difficulties strengthen the mind as labor does the body. Every moment alone is a chance to create, reflect, or innovate. Virginia Woolf transformed her solitary walks into groundbreaking essays. Beethoven composed his late masterpieces in deafness, a profound physical isolation. These weren't victims of circumstance, they were alchemists turning loneliness into legacy. So how do you start? First, reframe the narrative. Instead of "I'm alone," try "I'm undistracted." Then channel that energy. Write, paint, study, or build, not to fill the silence, but to honor it. The Stoics called this amor fati, loving your fate. Your isolation isn't a flaw in the universe, it's an invitation to dig deeper. And here's the secret: creativity thrives in emptiness. When external noise fades, you hear your own voice clearly. That's why so many breakthroughs happen in solitude. It's not about waiting for inspiration, it's about showing up day after day and letting the quiet work its magic. As Epictetus would say, circumstances don't make the man, they reveal him. What will your loneliness reveal? Next, we'll explore how joining a Stoic community can offer fellowship without dependency, another way to transform solitude into strength. Now let's talk about the power of connection Stoic style. While solitude can be transformative, Stoicism also teaches the value of community. The ancient Stoics gathered in the Stoa Poikile, a painted colonnade in Athens, to discuss philosophy and life. Today, you don't need a marble porch to find that same fellowship. Modern Stoic communities, both online and local, offer spaces to share insights, ask questions, and grow alongside like-minded people. Here's the key distinction: Stoicism values connection, not dependency. Unlike social circles where you might seek constant validation, a Stoic community is about mutual growth. Think of it as a gym for the mind. You show up to strengthen your principles, not to lean on others. Platforms like the Stoic Fellowship or Reddit Stoicism group provide forums for discussion, while local meetups and reading circles bring philosophy into real-world conversations. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "What's bad for the hive is bad for the bee." Even the most self-sufficient among us benefit from shared wisdom. Joining a community doesn't mean abandoning your independence, it means refining it through dialogue. You might debate Seneca's letters, dissect Epictetus' teachings, or simply listen to others' struggles and triumphs. Every interaction becomes a mirror, reflecting your own progress and challenges. And here's the beauty of it: these groups honor the Stoic ideal of sympatheia, the interconnectedness of all things. You're not just joining a club, you're tapping into a tradition that spans millennia. Whether online or in person, the goal is the same: to walk the path of wisdom together without losing sight of your inner resilience. So if loneliness feels heavy, remember Stoicism offers both solitude and solidarity. Next, we'll lighten the load with a surprising tool: laughter. Because sometimes the best way to disarm loneliness is to laugh right at it. Now, let's shift gears and explore a lighter side of Stoicism, one that might surprise you. The 24th way to deal with loneliness is to laugh at life's absurdity. Yes, you heard that right. Stoicism isn't just about solemn reflection and stern discipline. It also has a rich tradition of humor dating back to Democritus, the ancient philosopher known as the laughing sage. While others fretted over life's troubles, he found joy in its contradictions, chuckling at the folly of human nature. Here's the Stoic twist: laughter isn't just an escape, it's a tool. When loneliness creeps in, instead of resisting it or sinking into its weight, try laughing at it. Not in a mocking way, but as a way to disarm its power. Think of it like this: loneliness often feels like a serious, unshakable shadow. But what if you turned it into something absurd? Imagine your solitude as a grumpy neighbor who takes themselves too seriously, or as a dramatic actor performing a solo tragedy. By reframing it with humor, you strip away its intensity. Marcus Aurelius, despite his reputation for seriousness, wrote about the importance of seeing life's fleeting nature. He reminded himself that even emperors are forgotten, that grand dramas are just smoke and vapor. There's a dark comedy in that. If nothing lasts, why not laugh at the temporary discomfort of loneliness? This isn't about dismissing your feelings. It's about perspective. The Stoics taught that our judgments shape our suffering. When you laugh at loneliness, you're not denying it. You're choosing not to let it define you. Try it today. Next time you feel isolated, crack a joke about it, even if it's just in your head. Watch how the weight lightens. And with that, we come to our final Stoic strategy, one that ties all these lessons together. Because even laughter, like loneliness, is fleeting, what remains is the wisdom to navigate both. Now, as we reach the final Stoic strategy, let's anchor everything we've learned in one timeless truth: impermanence. The 25th way to deal with loneliness is to remember that nothing, not even this feeling, lasts forever. Marcus Aurelius put it best when he wrote, "You could leave life right now." Let that determine what you do and say and think. At first glance, that might sound grim, but there's profound comfort in it. If even life itself is fleeting, how much more temporary are the emotions that pass through us? Loneliness often tricks us into believing it's permanent, that we're stuck in its grip. But the Stoics saw time as a river, constantly carrying everything away: joys, sorrows, even the hardest moments. Imagine your loneliness as a leaf floating on that river. It might linger for a while, but eventually the current will pull it downstream. This isn't about dismissing your pain. It's about recognizing its place in the grand scheme. Here's the practical takeaway. When loneliness feels overwhelming, pause and ask yourself, will this matter in a year? A month, even a week? Zoom out. The Stoics called this view from above, seeing your life as part of a vast, ever-changing cosmos. Suddenly, that quiet evening alone shifts from emptiness to just one small moment in a tapestry of experiences. Marcus Aurelius also wrote, "The universe is change. Our life is what our thoughts make it." That's the key. Loneliness, like every emotion, is shaped by your perception. By remembering its impermanence, you take back control. You're not denying the feeling, you're refusing to let it become your whole story. So as we close these 25 Stoic ways, carry this with you. Loneliness is a season, not a sentence. And like all seasons, it will change. Your task isn't to escape it, but to navigate it with the wisdom that even this, too, shall pass. And with that, we've journeyed through all 25 Stoic ways to transform loneliness from a burden into a teacher. Think of these strategies as a toolkit. You don't need to use every tool at once. Start small. Pick 2 or 3 that resonate with you, whether it's reframing rejection, finding lessons in solitude, or simply remembering that this too shall pass. The goal isn't to eliminate loneliness overnight, but to build resilience, one Stoic practice at a time. Loneliness isn't your enemy, it's your Stoic gym. It's where you train your mind to find strength in stillness, meaning in the mundane, and connection even when you're alone. So the next time that familiar ache creeps in, don't resist it. Meet it with curiosity. Ask, what can this moment teach me? That's the Stoic shift, from suffering to growth, from isolation to self-mastery. If this video helped you, hit that like button. It tells YouTube to share these ideas with more people who need them. Subscribe for more Stoic wisdom and ring the bell so you never miss a lesson. Now go forth, practice, and remember, you're never truly alone when you've got philosophy as your companion. See you in the next one.